Eco हो रहा है.
Okay, there might be some internet issues already. Anyway, so let me honor to info. Anyway, so let me go. So am I audible now?
Satrupa, you are, joining in and going out. So I think there is probably an issue at your end.
There's some problem.
Yeah, there's an internet issue at your end. You are in and out. Maybe someone other than you who has a stable network, someone with a stable network can moderate. Kankan, you are able to hear me, right? Rest of all of you are able to hear me, is that correct?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, then yeah, it's an issue at Satrupa's end. Kankan, someone else will have to take over. Is there anyone from IIM Calcutta team other than Satrupa?
Yes, just give me 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, I hope I'm audible now.
Yeah,
Am I
Mr.
audible?
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you now.
Okay, I'm so
Go
sorry
ahead.
for the inconvenience. There's some major issue with the internet out here. So coming back, I'm so sorry, Mr. Sharma, for this inconvenience.
No, that's okay. Go ahead, Satrupa. No problem.
Okay, so Mr. Sharma is the co-founder and the managing director of Mantira Venture Advisors. Prior to this, he was working with Willgrow Innovation Foundation as the senior investment advisor. Mr. Sharma brings in 18 years of leadership experience covering venture and impact investing, startup incubation, investment banking, and financial domains. He is experienced in raising capital from a diverse set of investors and has also invested in and worked on deals in several emerging and frontier markets. A very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you, Satrupa.
And I'm sure this session will help the startups get a perspective on financial strategy and activities related to financial projections in the backdrop of new age marketplace. Would want the startups to make the most of this session and come forward with questions to clear all your doubts in the Q&A segment following Mr. Sharma's session. So let's start the session without any further ado. Sir, it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you. What will really help is if we, if we can see each other, I think that would be better. So most of you, if you are able to put your camera on, that will really help. Otherwise, it will seem like I'm talking to a blank screen. Great, thank you. Yeah, I can see some of you now. Subir, Aziz, I can see you. The gentleman to my left, his company's name was there, so I don't know who. Nashat, yeah, I can see you. Yeah, great. Great. So rest of you also, if you can put your camera on, I think it will really help to have the conversation. So let me before I start, I think it'll be good to hear from few of you. What would you like to understand from me? I've got some background from IIM Calcutta team, but if there is anything in specific that you are expecting from this session, I have a few slides prepared, so I'll talk through them, but I will try and cover some of the areas that you may want me to cover. So if any of you want to go ahead and tell me what are you looking at, that will really help. Does anyone want to say something?
Okay, for me, when I saw the topic regarding financial projections, I was looking forward to projection of sales and sales. How do you project sales for one financial year? And besides that, I was also thinking about projecting expenses as well. Besides that, I also had like a forecast of products maybe in mind, but I'm not sure if that's in the agenda or not, but those were the three things I had in mind.
Sure, I'll try my best to cover it, Kim. And if I don't, please remind me, ask question towards the end, and I will definitely answer this.
Yeah, sure.
Anyone else wants to go ahead?
So good evening. Am I audible?
Yes, please.
I'm from Northeast Farm Sales Promotion. My query is that for reaching out to any venture capital fund, where they ask for the financial projection, etc., can we as a non-finance background person develop it ourselves, or we need to take services of an external consultant to write this document for reaching out to the VC funds?
That's a very good question, and I think that's a question we should take upfront before even I present any slides. What is your name? I'm
Bhanu Pratap Singh, and in fact, I was asked by a venture fund working in Northeast Government of India that you need to get it done through some professional, and the professional fees are ranging in around 1.5 lakhs rupee for making that document, which is required by them. Projections, etc., all those things. Yeah, so I will tell you, first thing all of you need to know is that whether you use external help or not, as an investor, we want the promoter to understand the financial projections of his business, his or her business. We want you to really know the logic behind every part of your projections. What is projections? Projections is the kind of business that you're going to do, the kind of products that you're going to sell, at what scale are you going to be able to sell, what kind of profits you're going to make, right? This is basic financial information, basic financial literacy that every promoter is expected to have while running the business. So if you have not had any background on the financial aspects, you should definitely take external help, but don't outsource it completely. Right? You want to be fully involved in the process. You want to understand each and every part of it. See, understanding profit and loss, balance sheet, cash flow statement is not very complicated. These are very simple documents. And in any case, when you are running a business, when you are taking important financial decisions, important strategic decisions, business decisions, you will need these inputs. So I would highly recommend,
when you engage with someone, don't only engage that person to prepare your projections, engage that person to work with you so that you understand each and every aspect of it. Bhanu Pratap, did that address the query?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I think there was a good starting point, because I'm going to go a lot deeper into many aspects of financials, and we should address these basic queries upfront. So you know that when you are listening to me, please try and understand the logic that I'm talking to you about. Even if you were to take external help, you should be able to understand and be able to speak through it. Anyone else wants to share your expectations, any queries that you want resolved before we cover the slides that I have prepared? I can see still only 4 of you. There are many of you, so it'll be nice to be able to see you and put face next to your names while having this conversation. Anyone else wants to go ahead, or do I start with my slides? Okay, I assume I should start with my slides. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, it's visible, sir. It's visible.
Okay, great. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know about Mentera, we are a social impact fund. We invest in 3 sectors: agriculture, healthcare, and education. And social impact, benefit to underprivileged segments of the society is an important criteria for us. If there is no social impact, if the mandate that we have, impact mandate, if there's no alignment on that, we will not make an investment, no matter how profitable it is. At the same time, if the investment is having huge impact but does not have sufficient returns, sufficient scale and profitability, we would still not do it. So both impact and investment returns, financial returns, go hand in hand with us, as is the case for most impact investors you will interact with. You will also interact with many investors who may not have impact as primary criteria. They may be financial first, return first investor, or maybe more conventional mainstream funds who are just targeting to maximize the returns. In that case, the financial aspects of your business becomes very, very important. These are, like I said, our impact objectives. We have very clearly defined objectives. So when we look at agriculture, benefit to low-income households, small farmers, farmers below 5 acres land, direct and tangible benefit to them is very, very important for us. Our focus is on improving the efficiency of this system, providing small farmers with better market access, better access to credit and technologies, and also financial needs. Climate change is emerging as an important area. So addressing the issues that come out of climate change is an important part of our mandate. I'm not going to talk about healthcare and education because I assume most of you are in agriculture and food-based businesses. So this is our focus. If we don't find direct tangible impact aligned with this mandate, then we are unlikely to proceed with the investment. So your financial projection and financial attractiveness comes much later. First, you have to understand the characteristic or DNA of the fund that you are pitching your investment for, and you have to see if there's an alignment. Don't force fit an alignment. If there's no alignment, then I think it would not be ideal for you to spend that time trying to change either your DNA or characteristic to match with the investor. It doesn't really go well. This is a slightly dated article, but I presume that the situation has not changed a lot. So I've taken this graphic from Ken article. There is a publication called Ken. They send one article a morning. It's a very good website, I would say. So if you have not read Ken articles, I'd encourage you to read it. It would answer many of your queries. And specifically, there'll be articles on startups, agriculture, food businesses, right? So this was something that they had done about a couple of years ago, an article where they talked about how many of startups in India receive any kind of funding. So you can see there are almost 80,000 startups, only 8% of them receive seed funding. And out of those, very small number, less than 1/4 of them go on to receive Series A funding. If you look at Series B, Series C, Series D, that number just keeps getting smaller and smaller. So of 80,000 startups in India, only about 120 startups receive more than Series C funding, right? So only 450 go on to receive more than Series A. So availability of capital for the Indian startups is a challenge. While you will hear all the time stories about how availability of capital to startups and the type of rounds that keep happening higher and higher. So it is true that for the startup space as a whole, capital is increased in India, but still many sectors of the economy, sectors like agriculture, healthcare, and education receive very small fraction of the total capital. Large part of it goes towards what are called unicorns, very large fundraisers, more than $1 billion valuation that has happened, or to technology sectors, right? So core sectors of the economy don't always receive the capital that is required. And many parts of the country, if you go beyond few large cities, Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, maybe Pune, some top 8-10 cities, if you go beyond that, there are very little capital available. So availability of capital is definitely a challenge. But once the capital is made available, even bigger challenge is the efficient use of capital. Right? This is what is called a valley of death, where many startups, starting with promising ideas, even if they've received capital, they eventually don't achieve the financial success, the profitability that is required, or the scale that is required, and have to wind down their operations, right? So that is what is called valley of death. Now, any product, service that you come up with has to go through multiple, chasms of this. First, you have to do a research on what customers are looking at, and then develop your product and services around it to make sure that you are addressing an important market need. Once Is someone saying something? Yeah, so once you have done that, then after that comes the phase of identifying initial customers, those who adopt your product. More often than not, your first product or your first set of iterations are not going to be perfect, right? But there are going to be some initial adopters who are going to be forgiving, who are going to adopt your product. And then you look at scaling your solution, you look at getting the profitability. And along this journey, you're going to get different set of investors. Now, an investor who is looking at funding at scale and profitable enterprises, if you are going to be targeting them or talking to them at a stage when you have not even completed your, validated the market need, not completed, even the initial cycle, initial traction, you have not done, your unit economics are not clear. If you have not done that, then you're talking to a wrong set of investors. So many times, someone will ask you, what is your unit economics? But you've not started selling your products. You have no idea of what the unit economics look like, right? At scale, what sort of returns you're going to generate. These are the type of questions that will be asked. So it's not that you can't answer these questions early on, but early on it will be a hypothesis. You at least need to a hypothesis, even if you do not have historical financial data. In your segment, at what profit margin can one operate? What is the revenue per unit you can get in the line that you're operating in? Right? These are the questions. These are business questions. They're not financial questions. But financial projections are built on the basis of these hypotheses, these variables, and these assumptions, which has to come from you. If you outsource this to someone, some external entity, some chartered accountant, who may not know as much about your business, so many of the assumptions that that person is going to take are going to be very theoretical. And if any investor drills deeper into those assumptions, they will very quickly know that these assumptions are not going to hold, right? So you're not going to make much progress with your investors, even if you got it prepared in the format that is required. So please don't focus on the format, don't focus on the mechanics and mathematics of it. What is important is getting the logic right, getting the rationale behind your model right. Now, financials is only one part of it, but what are the elements of successful early stage business? There are businesses which can be called lifestyle business, right? I'm not using it in a derogatory manner, but many times an entrepreneur would say that, look, I do not want to scale beyond this point. Whatever, let's say 5-10 crore sort of revenue is good enough for me. I do not want to do a business which is bigger than this. That is not a business that can possibly attract external funding, right? Then there are companies that are focused on deal making, right? Raising large sums of capital at valuations which many businesses don't command. You know, at very early stages when there is no profit visibility, there is no the traction is not sufficient. Still, large amount of capital gets invested behind it. I'm not saying that there is no substance in that business or a substance cannot be built, but that's a very different style of building a business or raising capital with it. There's a VC funding that also, you know, large number of investors are looking at de-risking an investment when they're making it, right? They're worried about the risks. They're worried whether the business will scale. They're worried whether there will be good management team to implement the plan that is being presented to them. Right? They're worried about potential exit for them, what sort of returns they're going to make. Right? So you need to think from an investor's angle and you need to see, you know, what are they looking at? What would worry them? Are you addressing those concerns? Are you addressing them in a very credible manner? Right? So these are the 8 different aspects that I'm going to talk to all of you about today. Some of it cover the financial aspects, others cover the logic of what goes into your financials. And there are some pieces which go beyond financials or the logic, like governance quality, or how do you monitor or manage your business. We'll cover it if we have sufficient time. If not, then we will focus on the other aspects of what is there. Let me pause here and see at this point if there are any questions or whatever I've talked about. If there's something that you want to ask me on that. Because once we go forward, I'm going to be using many of these terminologies. So if any terminology is not clear, or if anything I've talked about is not clear, please stop me now and ask what you want to ask. Anybody has any questions at this point? Okay, I'm assuming there are no questions. I'm moving forward. First of those 8 points that was there was business model. Right? So there are, if you look around you, the type of businesses that get built, there are 2 ways businesses get built. One is addressing a very specific gap in the market. Many times as entrepreneurs, we are excited to solve certain problems and we make certain assumptions about what the market may require. We create a product and then we are searching market for it. That's a very difficult thing to do. Not interacting with the market, not having deep customer insights, not creating a product around it, and then later on going and finding a market for it is a very difficult thing to do. It's far better to really know what your customers are looking for and addressing for that gap in the market. How do you address it? You provide something which is unique, a product which is not seen before. Something which is addressing very specific customer needs. It's very customer centric. Maybe there's a product out there, but you come up with a version of it which is significantly better than what existed before. Right? There were, before Apple and iPhone, phones were there before, but they significantly changed the way customers started looking at phones. There was time there was camera in it, there was music in it, there was internet in it. everything in it. Right? It was not a single device, it was not meeting a single need. It was meeting multiple needs of a customer in a way where it was very user centric, very user friendly, very appealing. Right? They came up with something which was not only customer centric, it was very unique. You can come up with things which are unique and customer centric, but are they sustainable? Are they profitable? Currently, if you look on Indian Stock Exchange, there are a number of technology businesses that are getting listed, from Zomato to Policy Bazaar to Nykaa to Paytm. Paytm is currently going on. Are those businesses profitable? They are not. They are addressing a very important need, and there are investors who are willing to and able to fund the losses that these businesses are generating. But that doesn't apply for every business that goes out in the market, right? So when you are going out, you have to first answer this to yourself. Are you addressing a real and substantial customer need? And are you doing that in a manner which is unique, which is sustainable, which is profitable, it's generating enough value to customers? To answer this, there are these two questions which are very, very important. Who am I and why should you buy me? Who am I is not a question being posed to you as an individual promoter. It's not a question that is being posed to you as a company. If you walk into the shoes of your own product, and if your product was to answer this question, who am I? What is my product? I manage the venture capital fund Mentira. Who am I? We are a venture capital fund. We are venture capital investors. Why should you buy me? You should buy me if you are aligned with me on impact. Because if you're not aligned with me on impact, there's a misfit between what you're looking for and what I'm going to provide you. You should buy me if your return expectations are aligned with our return expectations. You should buy me as an investor only if your persona, your DNA is aligned with us. We focus on financial discipline, we focus on profitability. If you want to build a business which is probably going to incur losses for the next 5, 6, 7 years before it finds profit, nothing wrong with it. There are many businesses, like we said, they've been running for 10 years, 15 years, solving an important need. Not profitable still, but that's not us, right? So I'm explaining to you who am I and why should you buy me like this. You have to know as a product, as a company, who are you? Why should an investor buy shares in your company? Before even you go into any financial projections, any revenues, you have to answer that question. As an investor, why should I buy shares in your company? Right? So it starts from there. That's the first important question that you need to answer before we go forward. Now, once I understand who are you and why should I buy any shares, why should I buy your product? As an employee, why should I join your company? Once I understand that, my next question is going to be, are you where the money is? Whichever sector that you are operating in, whatever value chain, industry value chain that you're operating in, is there enough money in that value chain that is being made? The segment that you're operating in. Here I put a value chain of tea industry, right? So a small tea grower who is not doing anything other than just looking at tea agronomy and coming up with green leaf. He's probably getting 100 rupees for the leaf that he gives for make tea, right? 1 kilo of make tea requires, I think, about 4.2 kilos of green leaf. So he's getting somewhere around 20 to 23 rupees per kilogram of green leaf. This number is slightly higher. Post-COVID, it has gone higher. Earlier, this number was somewhere between 15 to 18 rupees. Right? So if your business, maybe you're not a small tea grower, but you are running a tea garden. And if you are going to realize per kilogram of green leaf, anywhere between 15 to 20, 22 rupees, if I look at the plucking cost, if I look at average labor, minimum wage for a labor who's going to pluck. If you're going to pay that person, let's say something like 300 rupees per day wage, and if that person is going to pluck 15 kilos of leaf, green leaf, at best he's going to get to 20 or 25 kilos of plucking, right? But let's say if it is 15 rupees, that means just a plucking cost is 20 rupees. Even if you push it to 20, even if you push it to 30, just a plucking cost is 10 rupees out of the 20 that you're getting. So I can just work it out that your margins are going to be really poor. Would I invest in that part of the value chain? Probably not. The same green leaf that is being sold for 100 rupees to a bottle leaf factory in an auction that made tea is fetching somewhere around 250 rupees average. Again, this number is slightly higher for COVID. Earlier, it was even lower. Now, there are some gardens who are top of the batting order. If you look at the auction batting order, top 5, top 10, maybe they are getting 300, 350, 400 rupees maximum it goes to, right? If you are looking at tea gardens that are selling at volume. The same tea, when it is exported as a packet tea, I'm not talking again the top of the league quality, but average quality that is fetching 400 rupees. If you pack them in tea bags, and if you're exporting tea bags, maybe you're going to get 600 rupees, but then your cost of packing, your cost of tea bags also comes in there. If you look at premium branded tea, something like Taj Mahal would be what, somewhere around 700 rupees, 800 rupees MRP. It be sold probably at a lower price. And if you look at single origin, artisanal teas, premium teas, right, they are selling for anywhere starting from 1,000 rupees to 4,000 to 10,000 rupees. There's a white tea that gets sold for 10,000 rupees. Now, where would I want to play in this value chain? I'm going to go where there is maximum value as an investor, right? So farming, processing, blending, packing, trading, they don't have enough margins. Marketing and distribution has good margins. But again, if I'm going to be competing with Unilever or Tata Group, I will not have deep pockets, deep marketing, spend, or the ability to occupy the, in market, whether you look at offline or online, the shelf space, I'm not going to be able to occupy that as a startup, right? So looking at those challenges, where as an investor I would like to play? Maybe I'm playing somewhere a different part of the value chain if there's something really unique. So if you are pitching a business to me on the agronomy side, on the farming or processing side, maybe you just disintermediate completely and you are directly connected with top export channels or top importers or top buyers in Europe. If you're directly connecting with them, and rather than getting 250 rupees make the auction price, if you are getting, let's say, 1,000 rupees, 2,000 rupees, maybe then you are doing something which is fetching enough value in that value chain, right? So more often than not, an investor who's knowledgeable about the segment that you operate in, or who likes to take a value chain approach, they're going to ask this question. Again, coming back to this, who are you and why should I buy you? Where in this value chain are you playing? Are you playing where enough money is? And here right now, I have only distributed the consumer's wallet. What end consumer pays or the buyer pays, how does that money get split? Right? Only 2.5% is going into farming. I'm talking again averages, there can be exceptions here. So this is revenue. Then you have to, in the same way, you have to distribute profits. How do profits get distributed across this value chain? What happens to working capital? What happens to returns on investment? You have to look at revenue distribution, you have to look at profit distribution, you have to look at working capital cycles. And whichever part of this value chain has got the maximum share of the revenue, best profitability, lowest working capital, that would be interesting to me as an investor. So don't just show me your projections if you are in farming and processing and saying, oh, how you're going to double or triple your revenues. Just talk to me as an investor about why are you operating, why is the space that you're operating is the best space to invest our money, because we can play in any part of this value chain. As a business, you may have chosen to play only into one part or maybe certain segment of the value chain. We are not, as an investor, we are not required to just focus on that. As impact investors, we will worry about it a little bit more. We will say, okay, is the farmer who's getting 2.5% in this, is that farmer getting more than 2.5%? Can I take that to 5? Can I take that to 7.5, 10? That is what we will focus, right? Now, if I'm playing in the packet tea segment, which is getting 10% of this value chain, if I want the farmer to probably double or triple his earnings, small farmer to benefit more, I'm not going to be able to do that by playing in this packing space or blending space or processing space. Again, I have to go to part of the value chain, which is more lucrative. Every industry will have different dynamics, will have different value chain, different sort of strengths and weaknesses. This is something you have to communicate to us as an investor, right? Again, going back to the logic of your projections, not only the mechanics or the mathematics of it. Let me pause here and see if there are any questions at this point. This is very important point, the 2 points that we have raised. So please ask me if there are any questions.
So I have one question.
Yeah.
So what is what is the difference between pitching to a impact investor versus pitching to a venture capital?
To an impact investor, first of all, your financial case has to be very similar, not too different, right? So on the financial side, on the business side, profitability, revenue, I don't think your pitch is going to be significantly different because your business characteristic doesn't change. Depending on the investor that you talk to, your business characteristics, your projections won't change. So all of that will be exactly the same whether you talk to impact investor or financial investor. But in case of impact investor, you need to make a case for why this has impact on the segment that that investor cares about. Like I started by saying for small farmers, small tea grower, for a small farmer, we want to give them better market access, right? So let's say in this value chain, if you are operating at this segment, single origin, artisan, premium tea, right? That's the segment that you are operating in. Now, if you show in a very credible way that you are directly procuring leads from farmers, green leaf from farmers, you're disintermediating, and when you are earning 4,000 plus, you're giving to that farmer 200. So you're not losing money. You are not doing some sort of charity here. You are not a not-for-profit business. You are making good money for yourself, and you are structured in a way to give better returns to small farmers. That is of interest to us. That would make sure that your conversation with us will go beyond maybe a first call, or many times what happens is you are talking to, in the hierarchy, you're talking to probably a person who is just trying to address one or two areas and probably accepting or rejecting. So you will go higher in that chain. Neha, did I answer your question?
Okay, thanks, sir. I have another query. So we have recently pitched to Johnson & Johnson in Impact Ventures. So they were, instead of financial return, they were mainly interested on the benefit we are providing to the bottom of the pyramid populations.
Right.
So is there anything we should look for if we invest in future to another impact investors?
Your question is that they were looking at impact to the base of pyramid.
Yeah, they were mainly interested in the bottom of the pyramid population benefit. So,
yeah, so I think there is now very detailed framework that many different organizations have come up with. At Mentera also we have developed. There are these frameworks that if you search online, Global Impact Investors Network, GIN has one, World Bank has its own program, right? So they have created a framework which talks about how do you measure, communicate the impact that you are delivering. So in our case, I gave you an example. If a farmer who was getting 100 rupees, because of your intervention, if that farmer gets 200 rupees, And
Okay.
that is not something superficial, that is credible. You have data to show that. You have consistently done that. Let's say you're operating for 3 years. You worked with 1,000 farmers, and all the 1,000 farmers, because of your intervention, have received 1.5 times or 2 times the income that they were otherwise getting. Right? So it has to be attributable to your intervention, that because of you, their income has increased. That's one measure of impact you can talk about. If you are giving them access to market, if you are de-risking them, like for example, in COVID, they're getting 100 rupees. Before COVID, they were getting 80 rupees. Before that, they were getting 60 rupees, right? So if they are taking huge risks, if you are de-risking them, if you are giving them consistent access, that's a second, reducing risk for them is a second part of it. So like that, there is a framework which talks about all the impact risks, and you can see which risks are you reducing and how. So there is a whole framework, Nihar. Please go online and look for it. If you are not able to find it through IIM Calcutta team, Kankan and Gaurav, to them you can drop an email, and through Mentera we can send you a link to some of these frameworks that you can read, and you can see how to develop them. There are also increasingly companies now which can earlier the cost of doing this was very high. Now I think there are few businesses that my colleague has identified, a few organizations that help put all of this together. I don't remember the cost of all of that right now, but that information can be shared with you after this call.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
So, Nihar, anything else?
Sir, just one. Should we include the sustainable development goal in our pitch if we pitch to impact investors?
What is the question? Should you include or not? Is that the question?
Yeah, that's the question, sir. Because we had not included that SDC part in our pitch, and after a few Google search, I found that it is very important. So
it is increasingly important to number of investors. But all of this, Nihar, is good to have. If your core business rationale is weak, you're not going to be able to attract capital by communicating your impact better and communicating your ESG better. First aspect is you have to talk about your core business, the profitability in it, the sustainability in it, the scale, the returns that you generate, that you communicate well. In addition to that, you have to do this also. If you can do all of this, then you are going to get better response from investors that you talk to. So good to have, but not, it doesn't come before the core business rationale.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Anyone else have any questions before I move forward? Okay, so next I want to talk about, it is not only sufficient for you to have your financial projections. I have not included here P&L, balance sheet, cash flow. All of you, if you have run your business for more than a year, the chartered accountant would have prepared it and you would know that. But you have to look at what happens under different scenarios, because you are projecting what will be your financial results that you deliver. You're projecting them. It's an assumption. It's a hypothesis. It can go wrong depending on what assumption plays out in what manner. Right? So if you look at the base case is 80 crore of revenue. When the investor exits, the revenue will be 80 crore. The profits after tax from this business will be 17 crore. Free cash flow, so cash available with the business. I think that number is not correct. It will not be 36, it will be lesser than that. The number is not correct. The gross margin would be something around 49%. The PAT margin would be something around 22%. Working capital at that time when the company is doing 80 crore revenue, there are about 10 crore rupees in working capital, your debtors, your inventory, all of that combined, adjusted for creditors will be 10 crore, which means 47 days of your working capital is what you have. Total capital required from the current point to this is almost 5 years of projection, is 13 crore rupees in this business. this company is targeting to get about 9 crore rupees in equity and about 4 in debt. And from the time this investor invests to the time they exit, this company is going to raise more capital, maybe issue shares to its employees. So there's going to be 30% dilution. So in this, it shows that at the end of it, the investor could make almost 6 times the returns. If the investor invests 13 crore rupees at exit, investor can get almost 80 crore rupees. This is a summary. Now behind this, there is very detailed financial projections. This is what an investor is interested in, right? What sort of revenue, what shape of business I want to have, what quality of business I want to have, profits and all, right? And how much money as an investor am I going to make in this? Now, let's say whatever price assumption that you've taken, if you were to realize lower prices than what you've assumed, 10% lower, 20, 30% lower, what happens? Then, so in this case, your selling price is down, selling price per unit is down, but your you are also able to get those benefits in your cost. Your cost also goes down. So your margin is not suffering that much. So you went down from 80 to 60 crore, but your margin is down only from 49 to 42%. Your PAT is down to 17%, right? But as an investor, we are going to now make 3.5 times of the money we would have made in the base case. Now, let's say rather than getting your working capital cleared in 47 days, if your working capital cycle goes into 80 days plus, which means your debtors are those you've sold your products to, they are taking more time to pay you, or your inventory cycle is much longer, right? Because you all are operating in Northeast, sometimes your supply chains may not be as efficient. So let's say it goes into 80 days. Now in this case, what happens? The investor is still making 3.5 times. But let's say if your overheads increase, now the investor is making 3 times. If your volumes come down to 50%, now the investor is making 1.3 times. Yeah. Now let's see your margin goes down. So not only your selling price is down, but you're not able to control cost, because many times cost is not in your hand, cost of your product. You're competing in the market, there are many other companies doing that, so you may not be able to control cost, which means your margins take a direct hit. Rather than 50%, now you are making 32% gross margin. That is down to 10%, the investor is going to make 1.7 times. Right? So here, as an investor, this is how we will think. Where are the risks? Do I see risk to margin? Do I see risk to costs? Do I see risk in working capital? Where am I seeing risks? And how is that risk going to be mitigated? Again, coming back to the same point, look at the logic behind these numbers. Logic behind the assumptions that are being made, which if you outsource to someone else, that person will not have the insights that you have on your business. These are the insights that we're looking at. When as investors, we're talking to entrepreneurs, we want to know how well do you understand your business, the risks in your business, and how are you going to address those risks when they materialize. Now, this can be different scenarios for a single company, but this can be 6, 7 different companies in the same space. Right? So when somebody is pitching some idea, your competitors are also pitching an idea to us. Currently, I'm assessing the company. Within a same week, the competitor of that company, direct competitor of that company, was pitching their business to us. Right? And this could actually be different companies, the projections or the financials of different companies. Now, between company A to company F, which company are we going to focus on? Company A. We're not going to look at company E or company F if we have 6 different options to invest. Right? So, not only do you need to understand your own assumptions and variability of that and risks in that, you also need to understand your competition, rest of the space, and how it plays out. Let me pause here. This is another very important slide. If you were to include something in your pitch deck, you want to include a summary like this. You may add 1 or 2 things here or there. and investors may require some additional information. But behind this is very detailed assumption that you should be able to answer any question on click of a button. Right? As an entrepreneur, if you can answer that question without referring to sheets or without referring to your CA or another finance person, that would give us a lot of confidence that, okay, this entrepreneur knows what he's talking about. Let me pause here and see if there are any questions at this point. Okay, I am not seeing anyone unmute or ask any questions, so let me then keep going. Now, this was your overall business projections. Next thing that is important is, so in your business model, we are looking at the credibility of your model. One very important thing that you have to remember is, as investors, we will always test the conviction of team in their own model. Let me give you an example of a company that was pitching a business to us in a different space, not in agriculture. This was about, I would say, 6 months ago. That company gave us some projections. Let's say they were going to do 50 crore in revenue, for example. Right? We told them, and they were doing, let's say, 10 crore in revenue a year before, and next year they were a year or 2 years from then, they were looking at going 5 times up in revenue. So we told them that this seems very aggressive. There is very high likelihood that you may not do it. Can you give us conservative scenario? This is very optimistic scenario. Give us the most conservative scenario that you are sure of meeting. Now this company came back to us with, I think, something like 30 crore revenue. That what they were showing us 2 years, they said will take 3 years to go to 30 crores. Then we said, okay, now this company was looking at, let's say, 100 crore value in the business, or 90 crore, let's just simplify the example. So we told them that, okay, maybe we'll give you 90 crore, but only if you hit 30 crore in revenue 3 years from now. If instead of 30 crores, if you are at 20 crore revenue, your valuation will come down from 90 to 60. So we'll get additional shares. If you come down to 10 crore, then your valuation comes down from 90 to 30. Right now, that team was really uncomfortable, and after several conversations, finally they told us that, look, we are seeing many risks in our business. We are not sure if we'll be able to deliver 30 crores. We told them that, okay, look, you came up with 50 crore number. We asked you for the most conservative number. If you don't have conviction in delivering your most conservative scenario, as an investor, how do we take risk in that business? How do we value you? How do we structure a transaction? We cannot, right? As investors, we're buying shares in your company, which is a financial asset. Let's take example of a very simple financial asset that a lot of us have experience in buying or selling, real estate, right? If you were to go and buy a plot of land or a flat, let's say its size is 2,000 square feet. Yeah, and let's say I'm going to charge you 1,000 rupees. Yeah, and 1,000 rupees per square feet. I am the builder or I am the seller. This would be 20 lakh rupees, 20 lakh rupees investment. You would get 2,000 square feet. Now, let's say we sign a deal for 1,000 rupees per square feet, and I commit to give you either a plot of land or a flat which has 2,000 square feet area. Now, at the time of giving possession to you, I can give you 1,000. I might give you 1,000 square feet. I might give you 500 square feet. I might give you 1,500 square feet. Would you be okay with that? You are paid for 2,000 square feet, so you want 2,000 square feet. That is the basis on which you have, valued that particular real estate. Now, many times I have this conversation with entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs come back and they would say, look, real estate is different from equity investing. It is different, but at its core, both are financial assets, right? So the basis for that cannot change so drastically. And if it was to change, that means investor is taking certain amount of risk. How are you addressing that risk? How are you addressing risk of serious underperformance compared to what you had projected to the investor? This is something that you'll have to think through, because many times, no matter what projections you do, transactions do not go forward because there is a significant misalignment between both sides. So when we look at business model credibility, we are looking at sensitivity analysis, we are looking at your competition, we are looking at your industry, we are looking at your value chain. We are also going to ask you if there is any proven efficacy or credible external validation. Let's say you're selling some product. Yeah, there is, let's say I am selling you a glucometer. Somebody who is from who has diabetes and wants to take a reading through a glucometer. Now I sell you a glucometer, but it doesn't give accurate reading. Or let's say I'm selling you a thermometer, which is reading your temperature, if you have fever or not, but I don't give you accurate reading. That means the efficacy of that product itself is not credible, not validated. It is not going to work out in the market, right? So many early stage businesses struggle with the efficacy question, credible external validation question, because whatever I mean in Excel, through formula, we can project anything. But like I told you, this 10 crore revenue business, if someone was telling me it's going to go to 50 crore, on what basis? Many times there's a company which is not even doing a crore in revenue, will build predictions saying that, you know, by the time you exit, you are going to have 100 crore revenue. What are the basis for that? I'm not saying it can't happen. All I'm saying is there has to be credible basis. Next important question that we will worry about is, because whether company does 50 crore, 80 crore, 60 crore, 100 crore will be known 5 years later. What is known today is the unit economics. What is the economics behind a single unit? So let's say you are selling a single unit for 100 rupees. Your cost of buying that unit is 50. That means you are making 50 rupees profit on a single unit. Now your indirect costs, your overhead, salaries, I understand is going to be really large. But if you allocate it over whatever is the reasonable, let's say, scale, then you can allocate your overheads and indirect costs for a single unit. On the basis of that, what sort of profits you're going to make, right? So this can again either be a hypothesis or a proven unit economics. If you have done 50 lakh, 1 crore rupees of revenue, this is not a hypothesis anymore. You should know your unit economics. You should know what could go wrong in this. Many times there are very optimistic assumptions about how the overheads come down as the business scales, how the economies of scale kick in, but it doesn't happen, right? Many times as a startup, if there's a question on when you will become profitable, someone will say, okay, when I'm at 100 crore, I'll be profitable, right? Or, you know, in place of debt, if we pay equity because we are paying very high interest, our profits become positive, right? So most of the times, companies are focused on the shape of the business, shape as in how big is my business, how large is my business. They are focused on the size, sorry, not shape, they're focused on the size of the business. They're not focused on the quality. Is it a good quality business? When you are coming to us as investors to take our capital, to seek our capital, are you seeking that capital to scale losses or profits? Are you going to scale a profitable unit economics, a profitable unit, or a loss-making unit? This is something very important. So not only are we looking at your unit economics, we're looking at path to profits, right? So we not, I mean, many times companies pitch about how large market is. India is a country with, 130 crore people. So addressable market, anything that you do in India is large. It's not the addressable market. It is what are you addressing? What can you very realistically address? If in your revenue, there's a concentration of revenue, there's a single customer who contributes 60-70% of the revenue, we'll see risks around it, right? If that customer goes, all of a sudden your business is down to 30% of revenue, start losing money, and then external capital is required to address the gap till you replace that revenue. Right? Like that, each and every component of your business, whether it's your revenues, whether your costs, with the scale, there are certain assumptions, but what is the behavior expected and why? Why will it go down? Right? If there are certain units that you're using, certain kind of components in your product that you're using that are getting imported from China or Taiwan or Korea today, and all of a sudden there is some supply chain disruption, what happens? Are there any substitutes, any alternatives to that? Is your variable cost really variable? Is it really, do the economics of scale, do they really kick in? Right? Many times there are going to be subsidies which are built into the business, like CEO not taking salary or taking a very low salary, that are not sustainable. Right? So you have to have truly reflect your business needs, anticipating the future. Many times there are very optimistic assumptions about the kind of team that is going to scale the business. Many times you will need to get in more manpower, more experienced people. Their salaries are going to be significantly higher than what you projected, right? And how do you fund your business? The way you are funding, is that really adding value? Of course, there are regulatory environment around. Some businesses take a bigger hit with regulatory environment. Some business, get accelerated. Regulations are very supportive to that. So each and every line item, there will be important insights that we are looking at. Next is people. For many businesses, HR costs and people costs tend to be the highest. Right? Tend to be the largest component. Even when companies are raising capital, large part of it goes into team building. Right? So there we will worry about the attrition rates. We'll worry about the quality of team that is already there. Because on paper, we can show business going from certain level to a certain level. But still there is a team that has to do it. Is the team already there? Have we provided for sort of salary, sort of remuneration that we're going to pay? Have we provided for that? How does it transition from a single promoter to a more professionally run business? Right? So those are the things that we have to look for. Many times companies promise ESOPs. What is the basis for ESOP? Is that linked to the business outcomes? Because if you're going to pay someone 5% of your equity for being with you for 3 years, but in those 3 years the outcomes are not delivered. Now that employee of yours is a shareholder of the business, but the value of the business has not gone up. But if you were to issue those 5% equity to us as investors, you would require hard cash of certain amount, 50 lakh, 1 crore rupees before you issue that. Right? Is that employee adding 1 crore of value? So that business outcome value linkage is what is important. So when we are looking at HR, when we are looking at people costs that you have put in your projection, you're going to look at, is it aligned with the business model and the scaling plan that you have presented? Then comes the cash flows and profitability. Many early stage businesses do not have a very strong cash flow discipline. Right? There is a daily view, there is a medium term view, there's a long term view of profitability and cash flows. So we would be not only looking at your cash flow projections, but the structures that you have that ensure that you're not going to be probably selling to people where you're going to have to write it off at some point, right? Or not collecting cash in time from your customers, which means your debtors are going to be really high. How do we address that? How do we make your working capital efficient? How do we make your overheads efficient? How do we make sure that whatever sales you have done, that shows up in your cash flows? And any management weaknesses, any structure weaknesses, that is something that we will look at. more important than projections is the discipline to monitor and manage something. Anything that you're not measuring is not getting managed. Right? There's very, this thing in Alice in Wonderland, many of you would have heard, right? The question that, which way should I go? Right? There's a reverse question saying, okay, where do you want to go to? I really don't care. I will go somewhere. Well, then it doesn't matter whichever direction you go in. This is what you will see in many businesses. Right? The question that you asked, that should we have an external person do our financial projections? If you have an external person do it, it's that person's projection, that person's business model, that person's thinking about how the business should go. You need to be in control of your own destiny. You need to know exactly what you're going to do. You need to measure it. You need to manage it. Many times we don't know what the problem is and we put a lot of effort in fixing it. That many investors are able to see in numbers. Numbers are only a reflection of other issues in your business. So how do you monitor and manage well? What are the principles of good monitoring? You need to have very good bottoms-up budget. You need to ask yourself, do you have a monthly budget? Last day of the month, do you open up your budget and do you see where all have you not gotten the targets, not achieved the targets that you were looking at? What are the causes for that? Did you underperform because of execution issues? Did you underperform because of external market issues? Did you underperform because you were too optimistic about the projections? You were never going to achieve it. So you need to know, is it a planning error? Is it an execution error? Is it an insight error? If you don't know it, you're not going to be able to fix it. If it's a planning error, if it's overly optimistic budget, then you need to know, okay, next 10, 11 months are also probably overly optimistic. If you're going to hit only 50% of your revenues, you might not make any profits, which means you need to raise more capital than what you're targeting. So it has cash flow issues, it has survival issues, right? So there are very significant issues if you don't get these things right. So start with a good bottoms-up budget. You need to know your business drivers, your operating metrics. They need to be linked with your financial metrics. These metrics need to be linked with the KPIs of every employee of yours. And then there has to be proper measurement, proper analysis and fixing of it, not waiting for your financial statements to be completed by your CA at the end of the year, or once in 6 months or once a quarter. This requires a weekly discipline in early stage businesses. Over time, it gets into monthly, and then you get into quarterly and annual discipline. Integrity of data is very important. Many of you would have heard this saying that we all trust in God. Everybody else brings data, credible data. You should demand that from your team, and you should be able to share that with your investors both before fundraising and after raising money. Governance and quality, I'll quickly touch upon it because many times it makes a big difference. Right? If the coach of your cricket team is bad, if the captain is bad, the team is going to struggle. Even if we have good players, they're going to struggle on the field. As a promoter, many times you are, not many times, all of the times you would be combining all three roles. Role of an executive, employee of the business, management person, director on the board, and shareholder. You are all three combined into one. But depending on the forum, depending on the conversation that you are having, you need to be able to switch from being an executive to a director. As a director, you are having a strategic view of the business. As a shareholder, you are asking questions that, am I using capital efficiently? Am I delivering the financial result, the shareholder value that is expected of this business? You are yourself asking this question to the business. But because you are in an execution mode, how do you ask that question to yourself? You are now on both sides, right? You are the shareholder and you have to deliver. How do you play both roles? So separation of those roles is important. You being able to switch from that when in a board meeting, if you call other members of your team to present, and as a director you ask them question, as a shareholder you ask them question, you're going to have a very different quality of debate. Your governance will improve. Once you've achieved that separation of role, you have to look at your governance architecture. Are you thinking of promoter controlled board? Is it investor controlled board? Or is it a board which is professional expertise that brings the value that is required? What is the composition? Do you have all the expertise required? Like, you were asking this question that, who should we ask for financial information? There is somebody in your team, there is somebody in your board need to have very sophisticated understanding of the financials of business. If you don't have it, someone else needs to have it. That's where diversity is important. That's where independence in your board is important. Authority for the board. If as a CEO, you are not doing your job well, your board should be empowered to ask difficult questions of you, do your performance assessment, and be able to fire you if it's necessary. Whether there is any investor or not, as a shareholder, you would require that governance in any case. You are the largest shareholder in your business. Wouldn't you want that governance? Wouldn't you want that sort of rigor? Right? So that is important. Quality and rigor of the board reviews. If you had people on your board who were asking these questions of you every month, every quarter, you wouldn't have to worry about how to answer investor queries because somebody in your team should be doing this. Somebody on your board should be doing this. Right? So moving from informal interactions to formal interactions, from ad hoc interactions to structured reviews is important. Please do that even before you raise capital from investors. Many times there are things like technology, clinical, if you are doing anything on the health side, if you're doing anything in education, the academic advisory board, that expertise is required. And then at the end of it, you have to ask this question, what is the economic incentive? If somebody is doing things pro bono, maybe in good faith they are doing it, but how sustainable would that be? Right? What is their economic incentive for making sure to hold you accountable, to ask you difficult questions? Many times you're not going to like it as a management person, as a promoter of the business. Why would someone pro bono come and do that? If you have people like those, great. But these are the questions that you need to ask. And if you address these issues early on, your investor conversation are going to be cakewalk because this is something that you need, whether you have investor in the business or not. Next is a fundraising rationale. When you go to an investor, when you ask for money, if you ask for 1 crore, 2 crore, 5 crores, you have to make sure that your sources and use of funds are aligned. If you're going to do R&D, at the end of which you're not sure if that R&D is going to be generating revenue, generating profits or not, you don't want to raise equity money for that. There's grant funding available for that. If you want working capital funding, you should be raising debt for that. Because working capital doesn't necessarily increase profitability of your business. It gives you scale, may not increase profitability. That may or may not have the desired impact on returns that is required. So your sources and uses of funds need to be aligned. Now, instead of an investor educating you for that, many times investors may not have time for that. Investors may have a transactional conversation with you, whether they want to invest or not. Right? So if you are being incubated, your incubator should help you with that. Even better, your board should help you with that. Then the money that you are going to use, what critical milestones are you going to be achieving with that? What shape and quality of business you are going to achieve with the money that you are raising? Are you going to get profitable if you're not profitable today? How long is this round going to last for you? Right? Are your margins going to get better? Is your working capital cycle going to get better? Why will it get better? How will it get better? Right? That's the logic that we're trying to understand. when we are looking at your projections or asking you questions on that. How much will you dilute? What does the proposed cap table look like? If the cap table is not aligned, if the incentives get misaligned there, that could result in the transaction not going ahead. The biggest concern that we would have in looking at an investment, irrespective of how good your projections are, how good your logic is to see, is there enough maturity in the business to make efficient use of capital? At the beginning, we talked about, while capital availability is problem, efficient use is even bigger problem. Is the management maturity? If the financial sophistication is not there, that would worry us. If the board governance that we are expecting is not there, that would worry us, right? So that maturity is important. Now let's look at the valuation basis and the transaction structure. The question that you have to ask is it fair? Whatever valuation basis that you are using, is it fair? Is it fair to all parties? Does it protect the objectives of each party? Now your business value pie is fixed at 100 units, 100%. You won't have 200%, right? It's fixed at 100. Now you need to maximize the absolute value. Absolute value you can increase. There is no cap on that. Value of your business can go from 10 crore to 100 crore to 1000 crores. So to maximize that absolute value and distribute it fairly. We talked about applying the same discipline to in-kind equity. Many times, somebody who becomes an employee of your business, somebody who becomes an advisor, the sort of discipline that you have when you are raising capital, saying, okay, let me maximize the valuation of my business. Let me get the best possible, pre-money value for the capital that I'm raising. So I have to issue minimum equity. That same discipline is required when you are issuing equity for in-kind support. What worries us is many times there's a fragmented cap table. There are like 40 shareholders. As an investor, it's very difficult to deal with 40 voices or 40 viewpoints. Even if you consolidate it, even if there are 4, 5, 6 different viewpoints, if you have too many cooks in the kitchen, you're not going to be making a delicious dish. Right? So consolidation of those rights is important. You should not make that mistake early on. To be very careful about how you are structuring your cap table. Now coming to valuation, what is more important? Valuation or alignment of business plan and mandate with an investor? An investor many times is looking at risks that a promoter of the business is not. And many times the promoter is valuing the opportunity that the investor may not be able to see and value the way the promoter is. Right? So if a promoter of a company says my business is worth 200, as an investor, if I say your business is worth 100, who is right? Where is the gap? Neither of us know what the future value is going to be. Neither of us know, right? So you could also be right and I could also be right. You can come up with transaction structure where you start at 200 and the valuation adjusts to 100 if the risks that investors see are materializing. You can also start at 100 and move to 200 if the opportunity materializes. But that requires innovative transaction structuring thinking that very few companies are able to bring, very few investors are able to bring. And many times advisors would advise against that. Everybody likes a plain vanilla solution. Somehow, magically, dilution should not be more than 20% or 25%. What is the basis for that? The basis for all of that is all that we talked about so far. Maybe dilution should not be more than 10%. Maybe it should be 40%. How do we know? I'll conclude my presentation here and we'll get into Q&A. I know that we have more time, so I'm happy to answer more questions. But in conclusion, you have to develop a credible business model. You have to validate it, revalidate it, right? Before you scale your business, get into right shape. Make sure that quality of your business is really good. And you've got the team that will deliver on the model, that is going to deliver on the plans that you're presenting. Don't underestimate the cash. Many times, if you have built a business with good cash discipline, good profit and financial discipline, you may not even require an investor. There is no better investor in your company than your customer, who pays you through revenue for which there is zero dilution of your equity. Nothing better than that. And I'm saying that as an investor, right? On any day, make your customers your investors, as in don't issue equity to them, but build a business which has good revenue potential, which has good, cash discipline, which is good profitability. Unless you have really large investors backing you, willing to give 100, 500,000 crores to really be the biggest company in this country or in Asia or in the world. Never compromise on governance quality. As a startup, there are no specific exemptions that you have. If you don't pay your tax on time, the penalty on startup and penalty on large company, both will have penalty. Depending on the amount, the penalty could be different. If you're not filing your returns on time, both have same consequences. The law does not distinguish between startup or a small company or a big company. Now government is trying to be more supportive of SMEs and small businesses, so there are certain exemptions, but not many. So never compromise on the governance quality and quality of the product or service you deliver. Most importantly, don't create structures where your incentives are not aligned with your employees, your co-founders, your board, or your investors. And the last point, which I have not written there, is do not outsource your financial predictions. It is your life, it's your destiny. You need to understand it. You need to take control of it. You need to define it. Yeah, that was my last slide. Let me stop sharing now and we can get into interactions. That's it from me. Happy to answer any questions that any of you may have.
So do we have any questions? Anyone? All right, it seems like we don't have any questions. So we are good to wrap up this session, I suppose. Well, it has been a very dynamic session, I must say, and I'm sure all our startups are going home with some significant takeaways, maybe better equipped to chart out a financial strategy and more confident about facing the investors, very importantly. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out your time, for taking up this very insightful session. Thanks a lot. And thank you everyone for attending this session. Have a great weekend ahead. Sorry, not weekend actually. Have a great week ahead.
Yes, Atrupa. All the best, all of you. You're doing great work in a geography which is requiring more and which requires more and more entrepreneurs. Excellent opportunities in Northeast and the state of Assam and the wider Northeast region. We are excited by it. We have done a lot of research ourselves. We see many possibilities, and hopefully we would be making few investments. We made our first investment in the state of Assam about a month, 1.5 months ago in the tea business, and we are developing that from scratch in partnership with few investors from Calcutta and also a few partners on ground in Assam. And we are hoping to do that in many other value chains in Assam. So all the best. Hopefully we'll partner with some of you to make a difference and to unlock these opportunities. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.